They say dogs can sense evil before it speaks. But no one expected a canine to break into a classroom, snarl at a respected teacher, and bite. It happened just after morning announcements. Room 12 had always been unusually quiet, like a library that forgot it was a classroom. The students in Mrs. Halbrook's third grade sat in neat rows, backs straight, pencils sharpened. The only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional squeak of a wheelchair. Emily Reyes sat near the window. She always did. Her wheelchair barely fit between the desks, and she was too shy to ask for help, so no one moved for her. She was the kind of child who said sorry when someone else stepped on her foot. That morning, she had accidentally knocked her colored pencil set off her desk. In a panic, she bent down sideways, trying to pick them up. One of the reds rolled all the way under the desk of the girl beside her. "Emily," Mrs. Halbrook's voice cracked like a whip. The whole class froze. "Did I say it was time for coloring?" Emily didn't speak. She was holding the red pencil, trembling, not knowing what to do. Then the unthinkable happened. Mrs. Halbrook stepped toward her. Her right hand twitched, then rose into the air. Not a motion to scold, not a warning gesture, but a hand lifted like someone preparing to strike. And that's when the door slammed open with a crash. A blur of black and tan fur tore into the classroom, barking loud enough to shake the windows. Chaos erupted, papers flew, kids screamed, chairs scraped backward. Mrs. Halbrook spun around, her arm still frozen mid-air. The dog, a massive German shepherd wearing a black tactical vest labeled K9 Unit, was already mid-air. He launched toward Mrs. Halbrook, his snarl echoing off the walls. Then came the sound that would echo in that school for years, teeth sinking into fabric. 5 minutes earlier, Officer Dean Carter had been on a routine drug sweep training exercise with his K9 partner Marlowe across town. Marlowe was calm, always. He didn't bark unless told. He didn't lunge. He didn't bite. Until that moment. Without warning, Marlowe let out a deep growl, yanked himself free of his handler's grip, and bolted toward the elementary school like he'd caught a scent only he could understand. It made no sense. Not then. But Officer Carter ran after him, his heart pounding harder with each block. Back in room 12, everything stood still after the bite. The teacher screamed in shock, holding her arm. Marlowe didn't attack again. He simply stood between Emily and the teacher, his body stiff, lips pulled back in warning. His eyes were locked on the adult like he saw something no one else could. The classroom door burst open a second time. Officer Carter appeared out of breath. "Stand down, Marlowe, stand down." But Marlowe didn't move. Not yet. Then he looked up at his handler, gave a low whimper, and finally backed away, still standing protectively in front of Emily. The school went into lockdown mode. Paramedics treated the bite on Mrs. Halbrook's forearm. Police took statements. Parents were called. Emily, she didn't say a word. She just held on to Marlowe's thick fur as if it were a life raft. If stories like this move you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to Brave Animals. We share real-life stories of heroic dogs doing the unthinkable to protect those who can't protect themselves. That night, Emily's mom sat across from Officer Carter in the station. Her hands trembled as she unfolded a wrinkled napkin. Emily's only form of communication that day. She hadn't spoken since the incident. On the napkin was a drawing, a stick figure girl in a wheelchair, a taller figure with a raised hand beside her, and a dog, baring its teeth, standing between them. Beneath, it in wobbly handwriting, "He heard me." Police reviewed the classroom's camera feed, but somehow it had gone offline 5 minutes before the event. The teacher claimed she was just reaching to grab a dropped pencil and accused Marlowe of going rogue. But a classmate told her parents something chilling. "Mrs. Halbrook always gets mad at Emily. Yesterday I heard her say, 'One more mistake, and I'll teach you not to embarrass me.'" Several other children shared similar experiences. Stories of harsh punishments, cruel whispers, emotional intimidation, but none had spoken up before. Marlowe had. Later that week, Emily spoke again, softly, only to Officer Carter. She told me not to talk, said I was making the class look weak. But Marlowe knew. He knew. When asked how he knew to come to that room, Carter could only shake his head. He's never done anything like this. He just ran, like he could feel something was wrong, like Emily was calling for help without saying a word. The day after the incident, the elementary school in Oak Hollow didn't sound like a school. There was no laughter, no footsteps, rushing down the hallways, and certainly no singing from the third-grade music class. The halls were hushed, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Room 12 was taped off. Police had set up a temporary security line around the classroom. Emily Reyes's desk was still next to the window, her colored pencils still scattered across the floor. But the chair that once held Mrs. Halbrook stood empty. A soft outline of chalk dust still clung to the front where Marlowe had pinned her. Marlowe was no longer in the building either. After the incident, he was transported back to the K-9 unit facility. Officer Dean Carter stayed behind to file the report, but something about it felt wrong. The words on the page didn't add up to the feeling in his gut. Carter had been in law enforcement for 12 years. He had worked with multiple K-9 partners. He had seen dogs freeze at the scent of explosives, sprint into burning buildings, and sniff out hidden narcotics in places humans would never look. But never had he seen a dog disobey orders, break formation, and charge across town, unless something truly horrifying was happening. What made Marlowe run? What exactly had he sensed? That morning, Officer Carter returned to the school. He wasn't there on assignment. He just couldn't sleep. The principal, Mrs. Whitney, met him at the entrance. "I read the police report," she said quietly. "But the school board thinks it's best we treat this like an isolated behavioral outburst from the dog." Carter raised his eyebrows. "An outburst?" She nodded. "And the teacher?" he asked. Mrs. Whitney hesitated, then folded her arms. "Placed on administrative leave pending further review." She claimed she was reaching to help Emily pick something up, that she lost her balance and fell. The bite was unfortunate. Carter didn't respond. He looked past her, through the glass panels, to where a group of children were sitting in the cafeteria. Their eyes followed every adult who passed by. They were waiting for someone to ask them what really happened. Emily hadn't spoken again, not to her mom, not to her teacher's aides, not even to the therapy dog the school brought in that morning. But when Carter stepped into the room at the child psychologist's office, Marlowe's leash in his hand, she looked up. She didn't smile, but she blinked twice, slow and certain. Then she wheeled herself over and laid her small hand gently on Marlowe's neck. "She's been drawing again," her mom whispered to Carter. "Every night since it happened." She handed over a stack of crayon-colored pages. Each one was a version of the same scene: a tall figure in a gray dress, angry eyes, a small girl in a wheelchair, arms raised in fear, and a large dog with open jaws between them. But one drawing was different. This one had words. In shaky, crooked letters, Emily had written, "She said no one would believe me." Carter stared at the page for a long time. Then he called the precinct. The problem was, there was no physical proof. The classroom camera system had gone down that morning. When the IT team checked the logs, they found the footage stopped exactly 6 minutes before the incident. The rest was blank, too clean. The footage could have been deleted, but who would know how and why? Officer Carter went to the school's tech room. The server showed no signs of outside hacking. The logs showed no user login. It looked like a simple power loss, a glitch, but Carter had seen glitches before. They didn't usually happen in the middle of third period on a Tuesday in one specific classroom for exactly 8 minutes. That kind of glitch had a name. It was called sabotage. The next lead came unexpectedly. A girl from the class named Haley asked to speak with someone. Her hands were shaking. She wouldn't sit down. "I think Mrs. Halbrook hates Emily," she said. "She used to tell us not to help her. Said if we kept helping her, she'd never learn." Haley looked down. One time Emily dropped her math sheet. I picked it up and Mrs. Halbrook made me stand in the hallway for interference. She said disabled kids needed tough love, not pity. Carter felt his jaw tighten. Did anyone else hear that? He asked. Haley nodded. I think we all did, but no one said anything. We thought it was normal. I mean, she's a teacher. Digging into Mrs. Halbrook's record revealed something odd. There were no write-ups, no complaints, no disciplinary actions. She was marked as strict but effective in past evaluations. But Carter wasn't satisfied. He filed a request for employment history under a broader database and found something interesting. Before teaching at Oak Hollow, Mrs. Halbrook had been employed at a private behavioral correction facility for troubled teens. The school had been shut down 3 years ago for reported staff misconduct. One name stuck out in the complaint list: Grace Halbrook. The report claimed she was dismissed for inappropriate disciplinary strategies that bordered on psychological manipulation. The case had been quietly settled, no charges filed. Somehow that incident never made it into her public teaching record, and yet it explained everything. By Thursday afternoon, the school board had scheduled a closed-door meeting. Officer Carter was invited as a courtesy. He brought the drawings. He also brought Marlo. Mrs. Halbrook was not present. Her lawyer had advised her not to speak. The board reviewed Carter's findings: the sketch, the old records, the testimonies from 3 students, then 5. They heard about the missing footage and the unexplained glitch. Still, there were doubts. No clear evidence, no visual proof, until Carter reached into his pocket. I want to play something for you, he said. He set a small device on the table. It was Emily's smart badge, a tracker and emergency recorder given to children with mobility issues for safety. The school had issued it to her at the start of the year. No one remembered it recorded audio. Carter pressed play. At first, there was classroom chatter, pencil taps, light noises, then came a voice. Low, sharp. Do you like making a fool of me, Emily? A pause. Then the scrape of a chair. Footsteps. Maybe if you weren't so pathetic, I wouldn't have to keep stopping class just for you. Then a sound. Flesh on desk. The rustle of sudden movement. A child's sharp breath. And then, in the distance, barking, followed by the crash of a door. And chaos. When the audio ended, the room was silent. No one questioned Marlo again. Outside the boardroom, Carter leaned down to his canine partner. You knew, didn't you? Marlo looked up, his ears relaxed, his body calm for the first time in days. He didn't need words. He never did. The next week, Mrs. Halbrook's license was revoked. An investigation was opened into how her past employment history was hidden. More students came forward, not just from Oak Hollow, but from her old job. Emily returned to school the following Monday, but this time she sat at the front of the class. Not in the back corner by the window. Her new teacher, Mrs. Daniels, gave her extra space for her wheelchair and called on her often, not to embarrass, but to include. And on the classroom wall, above the bulletin board, was a framed photo of Marlo. Next to it, a poster read, "Sometimes the bravest voices don't come from people, they come from the ones who listen." The story of the canine dog that bit a teacher to protect a child had made local headlines for a day or two. But in a world saturated with news, it faded fast. Not for Emily, and not for Officer Dean Carter. He couldn't let it go, not just because Marlo had saved a child's life, but because this wasn't normal. This wasn't just a well-trained dog acting out of instinct. This was something deeper. Marlo had never met Emily before. So how did he know? Back at the precinct, Carter was scrolling through archived case reports when a voice broke his concentration. "Still thinking about that bite?" said Officer Amanda Reed, sliding a coffee cup across his desk. "More than thinking," Carter replied. Reed raised an eyebrow. "You think there's more to it?" "I think this wasn't the first time," Carter said, eyes locked on the screen. "You mean Marlo's done this before?" "Not exactly," Carter said slowly. "But I think he's picked up on something before. Something the rest of us missed." Reed leaned in. You're chasing a gut feeling? Carter nodded. His instincts have never been wrong. He typed in a few filters and pulled up a report from 18 months ago. Case 3027B, missing juvenile. Age 11. Name, Carly Benton. Carly had disappeared on her walk home from school. No ransom, no contact. For days there were no leads, until Marlowe led them to an abandoned barn 2 counties over. There they found Carly, alive, bruised, shaken, but safe. Marlowe had led them straight to her, even though no trail dogs picked up her scent. Everyone called it a miracle. But Carter remembered one detail no one else had thought twice about. Marlowe had growled at one of the first responders, a new hire, a young man from out of town. No one paid it much mind. The guy had passed background checks after all, but something in Marlowe's reaction had stayed with Carter. He never let that man get close to the girl. Carter reopened that old file. The young responder's name was Shane Doyle. Clean record, no red flags. But Carter noticed something strange. Shane had left the department 2 weeks after the rescue. No explanation. No forwarding address. And when Carter checked further, he found something buried in an internal memo. A different girl, foster care, another county, had named Shane Doyle in a sealed testimony after a counselor reported signs of abuse. But the case had quietly closed due to lack of evidence. Carter leaned back in his chair. 2 girls, he whispered. 2 close calls. 1 dog. That evening, Carter took Marlowe for a walk along the trail near his neighborhood. Leaves crunched underfoot. The sun dipped low, casting golden light across the trees. Carter didn't leash Marlowe. He didn't need to. As they walked, Carter spoke softly. I know you can't talk, but if you could, I think you'd tell me something's wrong with how we do things. Marlowe paused ahead, ears perked. You see things we don't. Feel things we ignore. The dog turned, eyes meeting Carter's. Then he trotted forward again, nose to the ground. The next morning, Carter visited Emily's school therapist, Dr. Benjamin Lowe. Emily's made progress, Dr. Lowe said. But there's something I want to show you. He handed Carter a paper, another one of Emily's drawings. This one was different. It showed a small girl sitting in her wheelchair, surrounded by other stick figures. One had angry scribbles for eyes, clearly Mrs. Halbrook, but in the corner, barely noticeable, was a man in a blue shirt standing in the hallway. He wasn't part of the classroom, but he was watching. Do you recognize him? Lowe asked. No, Carter said. Why? Emily said he was always outside the room, just standing there. Sometimes he followed her down the hall. Carter felt a chill crawl up his spine. Was he staff? I asked the school. They said he was a janitor. Temporary hire, no record of complaints. What's his name? Dr. Lowe handed him the district sheet. David Shane Doyle. It didn't make sense. How could the same man end up at 2 different schools, in 2 different counties, with sealed abuse allegations and no consequences? Carter started digging. Shane. Doyle had bounced between temp jobs, rarely lasting longer than 6 months, always around kids, always contract or probationary. Never long enough to trigger mandatory checks, but there was one constant. Every time Doyle showed up, reports of bullying, behavioral issues, or anxiety spikes among students followed. No one ever connected the dots, until now. And Marlowe had connected. Them first. Carter brought his findings to the local DA. They couldn't prosecute without a victim willing to speak and some form of physical evidence, but they could open a formal investigation. In the meantime, Carter contacted the schools on Doyle's resume, warning them. Marlowe had done more than bite someone. He had disrupted a cycle. He had stopped a predator hiding in plain sight. Back in Oak Hollow, Emily was smiling again. Not wide, not loud, but the kind of smile that said her world felt safe for the first time in a long while. The class had changed too. Students spoke up more. They helped one another. Mrs. Daniels encouraged questions, not silence. And Marlowe? He visited once a week, officially enrolled as a certified comfort dog. Every time he entered the classroom, Emily rolled forward and patted his head. You're not just a dog, she whispered once. "You're my secret keeper." Marlo licked her hand. Carter stood by the door watching. He thought of all the reports he had written over the years, all the things that went unsaid, unseen, and all the kids who stayed silent because they thought no one would believe them. He looked down at Marlo. "You knew," he said. Marlo tilted his head. "You always know." If there was one thing Officer Dean Carter had learned in his years on the force, it was that evil rarely wore a mask. It smiled, it shook hands, it passed background checks, and sometimes it worked in schools. The investigation into Shane Doyle was underway, but Carter felt like he was chasing smoke through a field of mirrors. No fixed address, no real social media presence. References from temp agencies that barely remembered him. Everything about Doyle was designed to slide through the cracks, but not anymore. Because this time, a dog refused to stay silent. The DA's office agreed to open a multi-county inquiry. Carter worked long hours with investigators from other jurisdictions, piecing together Doyle's fragmented employment history. What emerged was chilling. Over the last 6 years, Doyle had worked at 9 different institutions, public schools, community centers, after-school programs, none for more than 5 months. At 3 of those locations there were documented, but unresolved reports of sudden behavioral changes in children, withdrawn students with no prior history of anxiety, anonymous notes from parents complaining their child no longer felt safe, but every time, the complaints vanished. Temporary worker. No record of misconduct. No formal charges. Until now, no one had connected the names, the patterns, or the trail of children too scared to speak. Until Marlo. Carter kept going back to that day, to the moment Marlo broke away during their training route, bolted straight for Emily's school, and forced himself into room 12 like a dog possessed. It was more than instinct, it was memory. So Carter went back even further. He pulled Marlo's service history. Before working with him, Marlo had served with a K-9 unit in a different county, working mostly on missing persons and trauma response. There was one case that stood out. A runaway case involving a girl named Jessa Martinez, 9 years old, reported, missing from a foster home. Marlo had tracked her scent across a frozen cornfield to a barn, the same barn where years later, Carly Benton had been found. The connection punched Carter in the chest. Same barn. Same tracking pattern, same K-9 dog, different girls. But one constant remained. Shane Doyle had been in the area during both disappearances. The system never put it together, but Marlo did. Carter drove 2 hours north to the last known address of Jessa Martinez's foster home. He wasn't even sure she still lived in the state. But as he pulled up to the rundown farmhouse, a teenage girl stood in the yard, tossing a tennis ball for a lanky mutt. She turned as the car approached. Carter stepped out, flashed his badge gently. "Jessa?" he asked. She nodded slowly. He explained why he came, why this mattered, why her voice, even now, could help other kids. She hesitated, then she looked past him. "Is that the same dog?" she asked softly. Marlo stepped out of the SUV and stood by Carter's side. His ears perked up and he let out a soft whine. Jessa walked forward, kneeling down. "I always wondered if I imagined you." Marlo licked her hand. She took a deep breath, and then she started to talk. Back at the precinct, Carter recorded Jessa's full testimony. What she said matched what Emily had drawn, what Carly had whispered in the hospital. The patterns, the manipulation, the quiet threats disguised as kindness. Doyle had moved among them like smoke, never lingering long enough to leave a burn, but always choking something out of the air. Thanks to Jessa, they now had 3 testimonies. Enough to press charges. The arrest warrant was issued that night, but Doyle was gone. A bolo was sent statewide. Photos were distributed to border checkpoints. Carter had his team monitor bus stations and truck stops. Tips came in, most of them dead ends, but one stood out. A waitress in a diner near Lakeview remembered a man matching Doyle's description. He paid cash, wore gloves, even though it was warm, carried an old backpack and wore a school district hoodie. He also left behind a paper napkin. It had a name scrawled on it, Emily Reyes. The waitress thought it was strange. The name was circled 3 times. Carter felt his stomach drop. School security was increased immediately. Officers were stationed at every entrance. Parents were notified but told only that it was a non-specific safety precaution. Emily was kept home staying with her aunt on a remote property just outside of town, but Carter knew that wouldn't be enough. Doyle wasn't just running, he was circling. Marlowe felt it too. That night, he wouldn't settle. He paced by the door. He growled at the shadows on the back porch. He wouldn't eat. Around midnight, Carter gave up trying to sleep. "Where is he, boy?" he asked. Marlowe stood at the window, body rigid, watching, waiting. 2 nights later, Doyle made his move. But he wasn't expecting Carter and 3 officers to be waiting inside the aunt's house. He wasn't expecting Marlowe. The man slipped through the backyard, climbing over the fence quietly. He moved like he'd done it a dozen times, but Marlowe heard him before his foot hit the porch. The dog erupted. Carter charged out the door with his weapon drawn. "Police, don't move!" Doyle froze, hands up. But even in the dim light, Carter could see the cold smirk on his face. "You got nothing," Doyle said. "We've got enough," Carter replied. Behind him, Marlowe stood growling, unmoving. Emily peered through the window. For a second, her eyes locked with Doyle's. Then Carter stepped between them. Doyle was taken into custody without incident. But no one in that town slept quite the same afterward. Because now they knew. Sometimes monsters don't come out of closets. They walk, in broad daylight. Sometimes they wave to teachers. Sometimes they smile at children. And sometimes it takes a dog, one that refuses to look away, to bring them into the light. A month later, Emily returned to school. She didn't flinch in the hallways anymore. She didn't look over her shoulder. And once a week, Marlowe came by during reading hour. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just sat next to her desk while she read aloud to him from a new book each week. One afternoon, she leaned over and whispered, "Thank you for hearing what no one else could." Marlowe rested his head on her lap, and that was enough. Marlowe had earned more than just praise. After the arrest of Shane Doyle, the K-9 unit was flooded with calls, emails, even handwritten letters. From parents across the state, some sent dog treats. Others sent heartfelt stories about their children finally sleeping through the night after seeing Marlowe's photo in the newspaper. To the world, he was a hero. To Officer Dean Carter, he was family. But back at headquarters, change was coming. 1. Morning. Carter sat in a meeting with the new division commander, Lieutenant Kayla Brewster. She was sharp, by the book, and under pressure to modernize the department's resources. "We've had 3 citizen complaints this month about K-9 deployment," she said flatly. "None involving Marlowe," Carter replied. "I'm aware," Brewster said, tapping her pen. "But the incident at Oak Hollow still raised liability questions. A dog attacking a teacher, justified or not, is a red flag for insurance." Carter leaned forward. "Marlowe saved a child. He exposed a predator. He's the reason we're even talking about that man being in custody right now." Brewster nodded slowly. "I'm not questioning his value, Dean. But Marlowe's almost 9. You know the retirement age. And quite frankly, with your tenure, you could take the desk and train the next unit. Clean slate." Carter didn't respond. Right away. He knew this conversation was coming, but it still felt like someone had kicked the air out of him. That night, Carter sat in his backyard with Marlowe lying by his feet, head resting on his paws, eyes closed, but ears alert. A soft breeze stirred the wind chimes. "You heard what she said," Carter murmured. "They want us out before we break the mold." Marlowe didn't move. Carter reached down and scratched behind his partner's ears. "They want new, obedient, and by the book." Still no reaction. And maybe they're right, maybe it's time, but if there's even one more kid out there, Marlowe's ears twitched. Then he opened his eyes and stared straight ahead. The next morning, Carter got a call from the department psychologist. "I thought you'd want to know," Dr. Lowe said gently. "Emily had a nightmare last night. She asked if Marlo could come visit her school today. Said she just had a feeling." Carter didn't hesitate. "We'll be there in 20. When Carter and Marlo arrived, the school felt off, too quiet, too empty. Hallways were open, but there were no kids in sight. A substitute receptionist greeted them. "Most of the students are outside today for the field day event," she explained. "Only a few kids stayed back in the art room. Emily was one of them." Carter nodded, glancing at Marlo. The dog sniffed the air once, twice, and growled, low, deep, instinctive. Carter froze. "What is it, boy?" Marlo looked toward the hallway to the right. Not toward the gym or the art room, but down a side corridor that led to the storage wing. Suddenly, he took off. Carter followed at a sprint, badge out. Marlo charged through the hallway, nose to the ground, then stopped in front of a small janitor's closet. He barked once, then again. Carter drew his sidearm. "Anyone inside?" he shouted. No answer. He tried the handle. "Locked. Maintenance," he called over his radio. "We need the master key for storage wing B." Within 2 minutes, a custodian arrived, fumbling with the key ring. As soon as the door clicked open, Marlo pushed forward. Inside, huddled against the wall, was a boy about 7, eyes wide, duct tape over his mouth, hands bound. Tears streaked his face, and crouched beside him, a man Carter instantly recognized from the arrest records. Not Doyle. Doyle's younger cousin, James, a substitute maintenance worker, hired 2 weeks, go through the same agency. He lunged for Carter with a box cutter, but Marlo was faster. The shepherd leapt, knocking him off balance with a growl that shook the walls. By the time backup arrived, Carter had the boy wrapped in a thermal blanket, whispering gently as the paramedics checked him over. Marlo sat beside them, calm again. Later that night, sitting on the edge of Carter's bed, Emily called. Her voice was small. "Was I wrong?" "About what?" Carter asked. "About thinking something was going to happen." Carter smiled. "No, sweetheart. You were right. You just didn't know it yet." Silence. Then Emily said something that stayed with Carter for the rest of his life. "Do you think Marlo can hear the hearts that hurt?" Carter blinked, then nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Yeah," he whispered. "I think that's exactly what he hears." The next week, Carter submitted his formal retirement paperwork. Not for himself, but for Marlo. The dog had saved 3 children, exposed 2 predators, prevented something unthinkable from happening again. He deserved rest, and Carter wasn't about to put him in another situation where instincts had to override orders. But retirement didn't mean goodbye. Instead, Marlo was officially reassigned as a full-time therapy dog for the Oak Hollow School District. His badge was replaced with a red collar, his bulletproof vest swapped for a blue vest that read, "School Guardian." And every Friday he sat beside the story corner, listening patiently as children read to him. Some kids didn't speak much at first, but they all opened up eventually. Because dogs like Marlo don't listen with their ears. They listen with everything. The years passed quietly. Oak Hollow Elementary still stood, tucked between the county highway and the endless fields of golden grass. The playground was new now. The classrooms had touchscreen boards instead of chalk. But the story of what happened that spring, when a dog broke every rule to protect a child, was still whispered by teachers over coffee and remembered by janitors, who had been there long enough to feel its weight. And every Friday near the front office sat a wooden bench with a brass plaque, "Marlo, the dog who listened when no one else did." Marlo passed peacefully in his sleep one autumn night at the age of 12. Carter found him curled at the foot of the couch, his head resting gently on a worn-out stuffed rabbit Emily had given him when she was 9. There were no sounds. No struggle. Just stillness, and the end of a chapter that had changed so many lives. Carter sat beside him for a long time. No words, no tears, just gratitude. A memorial was held at the school gym, not just for students, but for the lives Marlo had touched. Parents, teachers, social workers, and even strangers who had simply followed the story online. They came with framed photos, handwritten notes, drawings made by children who'd never met Marlo but had heard of the brave dog who protected the quiet girl in the wheelchair. Emily, now 17, stood at the podium. She had grown into herself, over the years, no longer the timid child staring out the window. Her voice was soft but certain. "When I was little, I didn't believe anyone could hear me unless I spoke," she said, eyes sweeping the room. "But Marlo heard me, not with his ears, but with his heart." She paused, holding up the drawing she had made all those years ago, the one with the stick figure, the raised hand, and the dog in the middle. "He reminded me that sometimes the quietest ones are the ones who need the most protection." She looked toward Carter, sitting in the front row. "And that courage doesn't always look like action. Sometimes it looks like presence, like staying, like standing between someone and harm even when no one asked you to." After the ceremony, Carter met Emily outside near the bench. The leaves had begun to fall. "I think he held on longer for you," Carter said. Emily nodded. "I used to think I owed him everything," she said, "and now," she looked up, "now I know. He gave it to me freely." That winter, Emily applied to colleges. Her application essays spoke of trauma, but not in bitterness, rather with understanding. She wrote about justice, about the silent cries people overlook, and about Marlo. In the spring, she was accepted into Washington State's Canine Behavioral Science program, a newly developed track designed to support partnerships between service dogs in schools, shelters, and crisis centers. Her goal wasn't law enforcement, it was prevention. Her dream? To train dogs to do what Marlo had done. Sense emotional distress, identify silent suffering, and step in before it was too late. Carter cried quietly the day she told him. "I thought I'd spend my retirement fishing," he joked. "You still can," she said, grinning. "But I might need your help writing the handbook." Years later, Emily stood at a podium again, this time in a university auditorium, addressing her graduating class. She was valedictorian. The topic of her speech was instinct and impact. "We're told that instincts belong to animals," she began. "But what if the truth is we all have them? That whisper in your gut, that nudge in your chest when something feels wrong. What if we stopped ignoring it?" She paused. "What if we listened?" She told them about the day a dog ran into a classroom, risking his life, disobeying orders, and saving a child no one had believed, and how that day changed the course of dozens of lives. "He didn't save me because I asked," she said. "He saved me because he knew." The program Emily founded became a national model. Dogs like Marlo were placed in schools, youth centers, and courtrooms. Kids who couldn't speak found comfort in their presence. Some called them therapy dogs. Emily called them guardians of the unspoken. She wore a bracelet every day with a single word etched into it. Listen. Years later, long after Emily became a leading voice in trauma-informed care, she received a letter. No return address. Inside was a photo of a teenage girl holding the leash of a German shepherd. No caption, just a single line on the back of the photo. "He didn't growl at me." For the first time, someone didn't. Emily framed it, because sometimes success doesn't shout. It shows up in silence, in safety, in the way a child stands taller without fear. In the end, Marlo was more than a dog. He was a reminder that instincts matter, that doing what's right doesn't always follow policy, and that sometimes heroes don't wear uniforms or capes. They wear fur. They listen when no one else does, and they change. Lives without saying a single word. So now I ask you this. What would happen if we stopped ignoring that small voice inside, ours or someone else's? Would we finally hear the ones no one's listening to?